And good afternoon. Welcome so much to the April installment of the Hemp Feed Coalition's monthly research-driven webinar series. For those of you that have been with us before, you'll recognize me, but for those who are new, I'm Kristine Ely, and I'll be moderating today's session. So again, for those that are new, this is something we do each month. This is a live presentations from experts across the industry, followed by time for you to ask your questions and have a discussion about the material that's been presented. So as a reminder, if you can't join us live every session, we do record them so you can catch up whenever it fits your schedule. Now, normally this is the part of the webinar that I usually hand this over to one of our lovely Hemp Feed Coalition board members, but today I get the honor of kind of giving you that spiel. So for those of you who are new and are not aware, the Hemp Feed Coalition is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing hemp feed approval through coordinated research, regulatory engagement, and industry collaborations. So our members include producers, researchers, nutritionists, veterinarians, feed manufacturers, and various advocates who share a common goal. We are looking to build a science-driven pathway to legal, safe hemp feed ingredients for livestock and companion animals. Exciting, right? So I'm here to kind of encourage you all. We are a membership-driven organization. So membership in the coalition directly supports the research that stuff like you're going to hear today, other researchers we hear from. It supports data generation and the regulatory submissions that are required to move hemp ingredients through the FDA approval process. So the other benefit of being a member is it's also going to connect you with a network of your professionals that are also going to shape the future of hemp and animal nutrition. If this is something that sounds exciting to you, and if you believe in expanding sustainable feed options, strengthening your agricultural markets, and securing approval for hemp ingredients in the marketplace, we really encourage you all to take a look and consider joining Hemp Feed Coalition because it's members like you and your involvement that are going to really and truly accelerate the progress that we make on our federal feed applications. So that is kind of my spiel on Hemp Feed Coalition. If you have any further questions, you reach out to the board members through our website, that'd be great. But now to get to kind of the meat and bones of today's webinar, I will throw a little reminder out there that if you have any questions during the presentation, you can go ahead and enter them in the Q&A portion of the app, and then Dr. Wishon can either read them himself or I will kind of moderate that and read through them and kind of try to combine similar topics. And we will address those at the end of the presentation, or you can wait until the presentation is done. So today's speaker is Dr. Corey Wishon of North Carolina State University. So Dr. Wishon grew up in North Carolina on a large equine boarding operation. I knew we would be friends after I found that out, so kindred spirits here. But this experience inspired him to pursue his bachelor's degree in animal science at North Carolina State University. During undergrad, Corey actually worked as a research technician at the North Carolina State Feed Mill, and this led to his interest in pursuing both his master's degree followed by his PhD, which he recently actually completed. Congratulations again. Dr. Wishon is currently the research director for the Prestige Department of Poultry Science in North Carolina State, where he is responsible for the management of all internal operations, infrastructure, and personnel pertaining to applied poultry research within the department. So Corey's research, his broad research focus has been on topics that are revolve around applied poultry nutrition. So this includes things like the development and assessment of feeding programs and live management practices implemented across multiple species to include broilers, broiler breeder, layer, and turkeys, in addition to work evaluating the proportional effects of formulation, feed additives, and milling processes on feed quality and flock performance. So we're very excited to have Dr. Wishon join us today. And I would like for all of you to join me in welcoming him as he presents evaluation of cold-pressed hemp seed cake as a viable feed additive in commercial turkey rations.
Take about 30 minutes of your time here to kind of walk through some of the work we did over the past year or two, some of the preliminary data, we worked on assessing some hemp seed cake in some of our turkey flocks. A little bit of background, in I think it's 2018, we kind of got some interest from some hemp producers in North Carolina, being that it was legalized for production. That they had this byproduct hemp seed cake with its energy and protein profile. We kind of thought it'd be a good fit for the turkey industry, so we kind of ran with it. We'll get to that in a little bit, but to start off, I just kind of wanted to give you guys a general background of the turkey industry and kind of what we care about. Not sure who all's on the call, so if some of this is incredibly redundant, I apologize. We'll go through a little bit of the turkey industry and a little bit of nutrition as well, so everyone's kind of on the same page before we get to the data. But turkey industry, like pretty much all the poultry industry, we make our money from raising birds, processing birds, and selling the meat to consumers. The turkey industry specifically, we're kind of facing a little bit of a challenge, though, in that it seems like consumer demand for turkey meat kind of is consistently kind of decreasing. So if you look at this chart over here in the right-hand corner, you can see our U.S. consumption per capita kind of peaked around 1990, and ever since it's kind of been dwindling down. And so in response, you've kind of actually seen a little bit of a reduction in turkey production. So this graphic on the left, the orange line, you can kind of see this is the ready-to-cook production. It's kind of been kind of slowly decreasing as well across the years. Part of that certainly due to high-path avian influenza. So in 2022 and 2024, it hit a lot of the industry pretty hard, so we lost some flocks. But part of it's also as demand goes down, some of the production's going to go down to kind of meet that demand, so that way our actual market price doesn't just continue to plummet. The other kind of challenge we always face as well is we have these big swings throughout the year in turkey demand, and as a result, turkey pricing. So as opposed to other poultry meat markets that are pretty consistent throughout the year, turkeys, as you can imagine, kind of the demand really spikes around November, and then throughout the rest of the year, it kind of dwindles around. So a lot of volatility in pricing there. The challenge for the turkey industry is, I guess the take-home message for this slide is the sales price of turkey meat, the retail price, is kind of capped. So the idea of, we'll just raise the price of turkey and make more money, it's not really realistic. We're kind of our own worst enemy there too. We're so good at producing turkey along with the other poultry industries that we have so much supply that demand really puts a cap on the price. And so the question is, how do we continue to remain profitable whilst kind of having that cap on market price? And so the historical strategy and the strategy, the best we got is to control our actual input costs. So if we can find ways to become more efficient, we can reduce the input cost associated with raising turkeys. And as a result, we kind of make that money on the front end. When it comes to commercial turkey production, there are kind of four main legs on the stool, so to say, of rearing turkeys. So typical operation is we start with a one-day-old poult over here on the right, and in 18 to 20 weeks, we have about a 50 to 60 pound tom or hen, depending on what we're rearing. So first things first is big thing we care about, and this, by the way, this is a really gross oversimplification. You can imagine it's more like a giant spider web of a million different things you have to worry about to make sure you're profitable. But first things first is poult quality. So we want to get quality poults in. We want to get healthy poults in, because a poor poult leads to a low performing bird, and we can't make a whole lot of money off that. So we put a lot of focus on things like our primary breeder operations that produce the eggs that give us the poults, and then obviously our hatcheries, making sure that all those systems are performing at a high level so we get some good quality poults. We take our poults, we put them in our commercial houses. That leads to our next stool, which is our housing environmental control. We want to make sure our birds are secure. We want to make sure the environment is comfortable for them. So we're not making sure they're not getting too hot, too cold. We want to make sure the light stimulation is correct. They're getting water, all that good stuff. Just making sure they're really comfortable, because a comfortable bird is a high producing bird. Once they're in there, one of the big ones is nutrition and feed management. So we provide feed. We want to make sure they're eating the feed and they're using the feed at a high level so that they're growing quickly. So, and then finally, flock health and disease management. That's things like vaccination programs, biosecurity, just making sure that we're not seeing spikes in mortality because, again, a dead bird can't go to market. So as our mortality increases, the ability to actually produce meat and sell meat kind of decreases. But of all these areas, nutrition and feed management is probably the highest focus in when we're talking about controlling input costs. And the reason is of all the things that go into growing a turkey, about 70 to 75% of it is feed costs. So, and then of those feed costs, about anywhere from 80 to 90% of it is dietary protein and energy. So if we had to really kind of dwindle everything down to the key to profitability in raising turkeys is finding cost-effective ways to provide energy and protein to a growing turkey. So there's two overall strategies to controlling those feed costs. The first one, and the most simple one, is reducing the price of feed. So if we reduce the cost per ton of feed, we're obviously reducing that input cost. And so that goes into the idea of kind of least cost formulation. So what you'll see in a lot of the industry is there's constantly substitutions happening within rations. So depending on the economic climates of different ingredients, you may see, one company switch from soybean meal to DDGs because they can get DDGs a little bit cheaper. And for a company that's making 1 million tons of feed a year, we can drop our price per ton about like 2 or 3 cents. I mean, that's $3 million right there we save. So again, that initial concept is just kind of trying to find the cheapest ingredients as we can to still deliver those nutrients to that bird. The other strategy we'll implement is essentially finding ways to improve the nutrition utilization within the feed itself. And so this kind of gets into the realm of nutrition of things like feed enzymes and probiotics and things like that kind of improve the overall availability of the nutrients in the feed. And then by improving the overall availability of those nutrients, we're kind of decreasing the amount of feed we need to use to get to that market weight. So when you go to talk to any kind of poultry nutritionist, and anytime you're introducing a new ingredient, as we're kind of working on now, their primary questions are going to be, what does it cost? So will it make my feed cheaper? And what will it do to my feed conversion? So feed conversion is a metric in the industry. Basically, it measures the amount of feed needed to grow a pound of meat. So in theory, the lower the feed conversion, the more efficient that particular ingredient is. So that's kind of what you'll get a lot is feed conversion and costs. So that's really what we care about on the integrated side. So obviously, if we move to the commercial side, things are a little different. We're actually selling feed, not meat. So you may be more interested in things like antioxidant capacity and stuff like that. But on the integrated side, it's almost purely related to cost. What is my amount of protein per dollar of ingredient? That's kind of really what we care about. But delving a little bit more into this idea of feed efficiency, the main factor in all this is what's known as nutrient digestibility. So it's the idea that any ingredient we use, there's going to be a proportion of nutrients in there that the animal's not going to be able to get. So there's always going to be inefficiencies in the GI tract, and there's also going to be different components of the actual ingredient itself that is going to cause 100% of that ingredient not to be able to be used by the bird. So the idea is we want to use ingredients more or less that are highly digestible, because that way we know we're getting those nutrients into the bird, and those nutrients are now helping that bird grow and kind of getting us a more efficient process. So some of the factors on nutrient digestibility, some things we can't control, unfortunately, species. So depending if it's a monogastric ruminant, things like that. Some are more efficient at digesting certain nutrients, and some are less efficient. Age, typically the older a bird gets, the more that gut is developed and the better it can digest different ingredients as opposed to a younger bird. Also, size of GI tract, so larger GI tract, more surface area to kind of absorb those nutrients in. And obviously health. If you have a sick bird, if you have a bird with a compromised gut, you're going to have a hard time getting those nutrients past the gut into circulation where they can use them. Some things we kind of want to see, though, from the ingredient side of things, as we're talking about a new ingredient. First thing is ingredient composition. So certain parts of ingredients can improve digestibility or they can decrease digestibility. So, for example, fiber, typically it is a hindrance to digesting like proteins. It's kind of it causes like a steric hindrance in the gut. So certain parts of the enzymes, they can't really get to the protein to digest it. Therefore, we kind of lose some of the digestibility. Same with fat. As we increase fat, it kind of causes almost like a viscosity in the gut and kind of causes some issues in digestion there. But again, as I said, being the protein and energy are the most expensive components of feed. Really like to see a good protein energy profile on the new ingredient if we're talking about introducing it to an intensive management program that's kind of characteristic of the turkey industry. And then other components, ingredient processing, particle size. The finer ingredient is typically, the more digestible it is. It's not always the case, but you just have a little bit more surface area for those enzymatic reactions to happen in the gut to kind of help break that down. And then heat treatment. So as you heat something up, sometimes you can get some degradation. You can actually burn certain nutrients up and become less available to the bird. Perhaps the biggest thorn in the side of nutritionists are probably these ingredient antagonisms here. So they're kind of just natural components of various ingredients, more specific to raw products, so things like corn, oil seeds, stuff like that, plant byproducts specifically. So things like trypsin inhibitors, tannins, lectins. And the big one is phytic acid. That's kind of, these all tend to bind certain components in the gut and make them unavailable. So finding ways to either get rid of them or avoid them kind of really help overall digestion and therefore kind of improve utilization of the feed and kind of make us a little bit more profitable. But kind of now that, hopefully you guys have a good idea of what we're looking for from the industry side, we'll kind of get into what it is we looked at from a research perspective here at NC State. So hemp seed cake, it's very similar to a soybean meal. So it is basically an oil seed. So you take the industrial hemp seed plant, you allow it to go to seed, go to grain, you collect the grain, and then after you press the grain whole and all for oil, the remainder is ground up, and we have this hemp seed cake, which is a nice little protein meal. But diving into the approximate analysis, what really caught our eye initially was the overall profile of hemp seed cake. It's got a really favorable profile from an energy and protein standpoint. So if you look here, so on the right is soybean meal. This is kind of the standard plant protein byproduct in the industry. It's been used, it's kind of revolutionized the industry for intensive management systems. And then on the left here is hemp seed cake. So as you can see, pretty good protein profile. So about 30% crude protein as opposed to 46% in soybean meal. Again, this is the standard, so it's going to be really hard to beat. And then obviously a higher fiber component and fat component compared to soybean meal. And a lot of this is just because unlike the hemp seed cake process, the soybean meal is actually dehulled first. So the hull is a really fibrous portion. So the hull is removed. And then they actually use hexane extraction, which is a little bit more efficient at removing fat. So if you were to dehull something like a hemp seed cake, or excuse me, a hemp seed, you probably would really concentrate this protein and get it a little closer to what you'd see in a soybean meal. But getting into the specifics of like a protein and energy. So when it comes to protein, we really care about amino acid content. So these amino acids are more or less the building block for the proteins in a growing turkey. So we want to make sure we're delivering all these essential amino acids in the correct ratio. That way, there's just a really efficient use. So the amino acids in red here are all the essential amino acids. So as you can see, soybean meal being higher in protein, it's also going to be a little bit more concentrated in these essential amino acids. So again, it is the standard for dietary lysine at 2.88%. Obviously, we're about a little less than half that in hemp seed cake. But where hemp seed cake kind of shines and what kind of got our attention a little bit is the actual amino acid ratios to each other. So not to get too far into the weeds here on protein metabolism, but the key to building proteins in the bird, so meat, isn't just supplying amino acids, but applying them in the correct concentrations to meet the cellular pool needs. So it's this idea that it's this limiting amino acid idea. So basically, even if you had, say, a ton of lysine, for example, if you don't have histidine in the correct amounts to make a protein chain, so an amino acid chain, it's not going to matter because essentially protein synthesis stops because there's not enough histidine. So making sure these proteins are in, or these amino acids are in a ratio that's favorable to protein synthesis is almost as important as the actual concentration themselves. So in this perspective, we generally agree that between soybean and hemp seed cake, hemp seed cake is what's known as a more ideal protein. So the ratios of amino acids within hemp seed cake mimic the ideal amino acid ratios you see for maximizing poultry production in the turkey industry. So in that perspective, we kind of got excited about this. And again, if you were to remove that fibrous component in hemp seed cake, you'd also see these bump up pretty significantly. But and then also down here, GE stands for gross energy, basically because we have a little bit more of that oil retention in hemp seed cake. It's got a higher energy value. So again, that unique blend of amino acids and energy kind of really caught our eye and makes us think we really have some application here in the turkey space. But getting to the elephant in the room, I guess. So talked about antagonisms previously. So unfortunately, hemp itself is a lot higher in phytic acid than a soybean meal. So down here you can see it's about 4.2% phytic acid compared to 1.1% for soybean meal. And this is kind of, again, it's a real thorn in the side of nutritionists. So it is the storage form of phosphorus in plants. So anytime we have a bunch of phytine, it kind of decreases that phosphorus availability for animals. So you have things like impaired bone development, along with all the cellular mechanisms required for ATP, required for phosphorus. The bigger issue on the protein and energy side, though, is phytic acid kind of tends to, because it's very negative, it's a very negative compound, it's nucleophilic, it will actually bind things like minerals, proteins, and starch. And once they're bound, there's no enzyme or anything else endogenous in the bird that kind of can break that apart. So you kind of lose all those potential nutrients. So we kind of, luckily, we do have feed grade enzymes, so phytases that are consistently used that kind of break this stuff down the gut. So not a huge problem there. But once we saw the phytic acid content, we immediately thought, we need to look at our digestibility. So going back to the idea of efficient use of nutrients in a feed, the first thing we wanted to do before we could try to formulate hemp seed cake into any kind of ration is see how digestible the proteins, the specific amino acids are, and then how digestible the energy is. So we could actually, it gets around this idea of precision nutrition. It's this idea that if we can formulate based on digestible values as opposed to total values, we get a little bit closer to delivering the exact amount of nutrients a bird needs. So we don't want to underdeliver because then we lose performance and thus birds don't grow appropriately. And so we lose profit there. But we also don't want to overdeliver because if we're delivering nutrients beyond what the bird needs, we're essentially wasting them. And as we've established, protein and energy is very expensive. So if we're just throwing it down the drain because we're over supplementing it, it's a real problem from a profitability standpoint. So again, first thing we did with these objectives is we wanted to just compare, run a digestibility study, just compare soybean meal versus hemp seed cake. What does the digestible energy component and digestible protein components look like between the two of them? And so to do this, a little bit of physiology for you. So this red box up here, this is the more or less the gizzard and the proventriculus, and then this initial portion of the small intestine. This is kind of where a lot of the heavy lifting happens in the GI tract as far as nutrient digestion goes. So you have some chemical digestion, you have some mechanical digestion, and then you also have this enzymatic digestion in this upper intestine. So the overall idea is we take these really large complex molecules found in ingredients, and we break them down into small little absorptive units. So by the time we take, so the P stands for protein, S stands for starch. By the time we expose these proteins and starches to these enzymes in the gut, they break them down into these single units that can then be absorbed past the intestinal barrier and into the bloodstream, where we can then use them in peripheral tissues for growth and production and things like that. So once we get past a certain point in the intestine now, so we kind of, these absorptive proteins right here kind of disappear. So the idea is if we feed birds a certain ingredient, we can euthanize them and then collect digestive contents past a certain point, with the understanding that anything present in past this portion is considered to be undigested. And so we can kind of take that out of the total supply and then get an idea of percent digestibility. So again, just kind of reinforcing, what we essentially did was we fed some caged turkeys several different levels of hemp seed cake for a couple of weeks. We then euthanized them, and we found, so basically here's the intestinal segments. So you have your duodenum and jejunum. These are the main absorptive portions of the intestine. Once we euthanized, we actually cut the intestine here at the beginning of the ileum. This is that component where all those absorptive mechanisms kind of end. So the understanding is once anything in this segment from ileum to colon essentially was undigested. So we say basically we'll take the total protein energy supplied from hemp seed cake in the feed, and then subtract it from what we found in the colon and ileum, and do some math to determine digestibility. But doing that, we came up with these digestibility values here. So as you can see, the blue is the actual percent digestibility. So this is the percentage of amino acids digested from the total amino acid content of hemp seed cake. So you can see, for the most part, soybean meal is a little bit higher digestible from an amino acid content and or from an amino acid perspective. And again, that was expected. With the phytate content of hemp seed cake, we assumed that digestibility would be a little lower, and not alarmingly low anywhere. For the most part here, these are fairly standard digestibility values. And again, if we use something like commercial phytates, which you see everywhere in the industry, these values I would imagine would go up significantly. It's just initially for getting a value, we didn't want to include any kind of phytase, just because we didn't want to kind of skew this. We wanted to get pure values for this stuff. But once we had these digestibility percentages, basically all we did was we took the total amino acid present in hemp seed cake, multiplied it by the digestibility coefficient, and got our what's known as our standard ileal digestible amino acid. So this is more or less what we now use when we put in an ingredient matrix to formulate with. So that way we're getting that true value of amino acid that's actually available to the birds. So that way we're getting that real precision feeding. We're not just throwing nutrients away. We know exactly, we're hitting those levels exactly as we want them. And then same with energy. So gross energy over here on the right, or excuse me, the left. Hemp seed cake's a little higher because of that residual oil content from the mechanical pressing. But digestibility is pretty similar here. Energy digestibility is not as sensitive to a phytate. So again, no real surprise here. So again, these are the values we'd use in a formulation matrix for hemp seed cake, we'd use this 2570 value when we're putting in an energy value to formulate with. But once we got our digestible values, the next thing we wanted to do was actually formulate some diets and get an idea of what kind of performance do you get as you increase inclusion of hemp seed cake into a ration. So two things we wanted to look at. First was we wanted to create several diets here that was titrated in amounts of hemp seed cake while still maintaining the same nutrient levels everywhere. So we didn't want to, we wanted to make sure all diets were nutritionally the same. That way we weren't getting any kind of confounding effect, just increasing in hemp seed cake. And so we could actually see the overall impacts on our KPIs here. And then subsequently, we could actually use performance from the different levels to determine actual optimal inclusion levels for different KPIs, the key performance indicators, depending on what we were doing. So for this experimental design, we took 432 female Nicholas Select turkey poults, organized them in 72 cages across 6 special blocks. And then, as I previously mentioned, we formulated 6 diets varying in HFC inclusion from 0% to 32%, so kind of titrating up. while also making sure every diet was essentially the same from a nutrition standpoint. So isocaloric, isonitrogenous, that's just basically fancy words for same energy level and same nitrogen level, or same protein level. So, but we gave, once we assigned our treatments, we gave free access to feed and water over a 5-week rearing period, and then measured performance at 1 week, 3 week, and 5 weeks of age. So here are the dietary treatments. So as you can see, we kind of manipulated all of our ingredients to kind of match the same nutrient levels, which I'll show you on the next slide, whilst also increasing the hemp seed cake inclusion across each diet. Unfortunately, this is in red here because we kind of found out halfway through we had an issue with the feed mill. So we kind of had to admit this from the stuff we're trying to publish right now, because we noticed the performance was not working out the way we thought it would, and it's because we kind of, I think someone forgot to put in, I think it was poultry meal. So stuff happens. Here's the nutrient composition. So again, kind of making it a little bit more clear. The only thing really changing across each treatment is the crude fat and crude fiber, and that's just because there's a really high fat and fiber content in hemp seed cake. So as you increase it, it's just naturally going to increase across the diets. But all other nutrients were kind of held standard. So energy levels, most of the digestible amino acid levels were the same. Arginine increased a little bit just because, again, hemp seed cake's pretty high in arginine as well. But for the most part, we tried to really standardize everything, so that way the only real difference we're seeing in theory is just more and more hemp seed cake are piling in. And then as we reared our birds, we looked at 4 parameters. We looked at live weight, and then we looked at body weight gain, which is essentially just live weight minus the weight of the poult at the beginning. So just how much weight gain we're actually getting. Feed intake, so how much are they eating? And then cumulative feed conversion ratio. And that's that thing I mentioned earlier, where that is essentially a measure of feed efficiency. It's how well are the birds taking feed and producing it into weight gain. So in theory, the lower the feed conversion, the better it is from an ingredient standpoint. So here's our 5-week cumulative weight. So just kind of painting out the way these charts work. On the y-index, we have our parameter. In this case, it's live weight. And on the x-axis, we have our different treatments going from 0 to 8, 16, and 30% hemp seed cake inclusion. As you can see, as hemp seed cake increased, we got a really nice response all the way up to really 16%. So these letters just indicate things that are significantly different. So while these are numerically different, while these may be like numerically different here, statistically they're the same, just based on overall deviation compared to the group deviations. So the best way to interpret this essentially is really up to, really in this case, really there's just a steady increase across. So across each inclusion level. So as you can see, pretty much live weight responding quite favorably to hemp seed cake inclusion. When we look at body weight gain and feed intake, so the first thing that kind of caught our eye here, so feed intake is here in the gray, and it is over here on this axis, and then body weight gain is in the red, and it's measured here on this axis. Feed intake, because you never really know when you feed birds something new how they're going to respond, especially young birds. They could reject the feed, or you could see, just overall decrease in feed intake because they may just not like it. That was not the case here. We had basically a linear response in feed intake. So 32% pretty much resulted in maximum feed intake for each group. So there was a really strong response here. We're not really sure why, but in the case of like the industry, this could be really good for especially like a starter ration. So getting birds off to a really good start, putting this in here to really improve feed intake, really get those nutrients in there. We could that could be a potential tool in the future, but this really kind of excited us. And then body weight gain, there was, again, favorable response here. Birds improve body weight gain, not a huge surprise there, because again, it follows live weight pretty predictably. The best way to interpret this though is essentially we got improvements in body weight gain up to 8%, and then after this, really all these they're seen as kind of the same from a statistical standpoint. But regardless, take-home message here is body weight gain certainly improved in response to increasing levels of hemp seed cake, so that's good. And then finally, our feed conversion. So again, lower feed conversion is a good thing. So pretty much no real difference between 0% up to 16%, which is, again, not the worst thing in the world. It means that basically, as we improved our hemp seed cake inclusion, they ate more, they gained more weight, and they still remained the same level of efficient throughout, up to basically 16%. Once we got up to 32%, you kind of saw a significant decrease in feed conversion. And again, a lot of these biological systems kind of follow these quadratic curves. So this kind of interpreted from my standpoint, it's more interpreted as once we get to that, past that 16% range, we're getting so much fiber and so much phytate into those birds that we're starting to inhibit things like amino acid digestion and energy digestion. So, but up to 16%, again, we for the most part, we saw a feed conversion that remained constant whilst also improving overall weight gain and feed intake. So that was really promising. And then finally, what we did was we could actually run regression on a lot of this stuff to get optimal inclusion rates. So the yellow is feed intake, the red line is our cumulative FCR, and then the gray line is body weight gain. And so if you run regression analysis and do a couple mathematical manipulations using the prediction equations, you essentially can get optimal HFC inclusion depending on the parameter you're looking at. So again, body weight gain, what we found was about 23.9% inclusion got you the highest body weight gain, whereas 32% inclusion got you the highest feed intake. Again, this is a real linear response. And then feed conversion, right about 9% inclusion got you the lowest feed conversion. But again, I'll go back real quick. Whilst 8% got you the lowest feed conversion, we also understand that like there's really no difference between 1.44 and 1.41 from a statistical standpoint. So whilst 8% is the most favorable, really up to 16% more or less holds that feed conversion in check. And so to kind of summarize everything I've already kind of said, again, feed intake significantly improved in response to increase in dietary hemp seed cake. That was, again, real promising. Dietary hemp seed inclusion above 8% produced significantly higher average body weights. So they definitely were using the nutrients in a way the nutrients in hemp seed cake seemed to definitely be available to them. They definitely grew off them well. And then, so despite significantly higher feed intakes from poults fed 16 and 32% hemp seed inclusion, no significant increase in live weight or body weight gain was observed in poults fed more than 8%. So again, up to 16%, we saw improvements, but those improvements were significantly different from that 8%. So depending on how you want to market it, 16% versus 8%, obviously, if you're trying to sell hemp seed cake, you go with 60%, where if you were an actual nutritionist, you may be like, well, I mean, it looks like 8%, you get the same performance, so why would I put it in at a higher level? But just something we found. And then finally, basically up to 16% feed conversion was fine, but once we got up to that 32%, it became impaired. And again, likely that's just a result of just increasing fiber and that increasing phytate. So nothing that really was unexpected there. But that is pretty much what I got. I'm not sure where I am time-wise. I'm happy to answer questions, or we can also discuss, future work / what we'd like to do at some point. But I'll kind of let our moderator take it from here.
Fabulous. Well, Dr. Wishon, that was a fabulous presentation. I look forward to the paper coming out. I'll be excited to read everything. So I have a few questions to get us started, but for those of you that are listening in, if you have questions, please pop those in the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and include them in the questions that I have. But to kind of kick us off and get us started, I feel from anyone that's interested in trying to work with hemp seed meal or hemp products in a feed space and knowing what the regulatory bodies are interested in looking for is, are you planning or we're currently working on evaluating cannabinoid concentrations in the bird?
Yeah, so that is something with this trial. We actually, at the conclusion, we took tissue samples. So we took breast tissue, liver tissue, and adipose tissues. We're actually currently in the process of working with our vet school at NC State to come up with some methods. So What we kind of ran into was we took the samples with the idea of if we can get the money, we'll do it. If not, we can put them on ice and deep freeze, and they're there for as long as we need them. We went to the vet school, though, because apparently there's no real methods for validating cannabinoid content in tissue. So they'd have to actually develop a method and validate it. So that would cost a little bit of money. Good news is there are some partners we're kind of working with that looks like we'll be able to do that work in the near future. So we'll be able to hopefully get an idea of the extent to which cannabinoids within the feed get into our tissue or get into the actual turkey tissues from a consumer safety standpoint. So that is part of it. It's just not currently done yet. So it's in the works, though, hopefully.
I understand completely. Well, I'm really glad that you guys are working on that. That's, when if we turn to poultry approvals for hemp feed ingredients, that's their first question always. So I will also just throw it out there, and you may be aware, but K-State is working on some FDA approved analysis in tissues. So something to also look into.
There's a couple. So when we first looked into it, this was the trial. The trial from the data you saw was from a trial in early 2024. So at the time, there wasn't a lot, but even the last year, I've started seeing publications pop up. So I think more and more labs are kind of developing those methods, those assays.
Yeah.
So in time, I think you guys will have a lot of options as you proceed with the approval routes and generating that data.
Absolutely. I'm very much ready to have some standardized testing methodologies. Okay, so I just want to read a thanks for the brilliant work and presentation. Femi also has a question for you, Dr. Wishon. Sure. Did you determine the ANF level of the diet and any histology study done to determine the effect on the intestinal integrity?
Not in this study. We have done it in a study that we're currently working on. And so I can't, so right now, yeah. So right now we, our next question after we saw this study was not so much from an ANF perspective, but more if you think about it from just a purely kinetic standpoint, as you eat, as more feed is taken in and birds grow faster and faster, you're going to have to increase the ability to absorb these nutrients to keep up with that kinetic rate. And so our hypothesis was, we wondered if hemp itself had like a phytogenic component to intestinal health. So what we did was, again, we're still working through the data, but we fed various levels of hemp seed cake to a second round of turkeys, and at the end we culled them. We took intestinal samples, we made histology slides, and we're currently looking at things like mucus layer thickness, goblet cell counts, villi heights, surface areas, things like that, just to get an idea of, is this explain the data we saw from this current trial? Is that the reasoning, or is it something else? So we are currently working through that. It's just, again, histology is a very slow paced thing. It's a lot of staring at microscopes and measuring and counting. So hopefully in the next 8 to 12 months, well, probably closer to 6 to 8 months, we'll have something out that can hopefully answer some of those questions.
Yeah, no, I think that leads into kind of another question I had. So I'm probably know enough in the poultry space to be dangerous, but you mentioned in your introductory slides, you were saying it takes 18 to 20 weeks from start to finish to grow out your poult to finish turkey. But you presented data on 5 weeks. Is there a benefit in increasing that rate of gain in that first 5 weeks, or were you proposing that increased weight gain would carry through the remaining production period? Or was it that you're focused on those first 5 weeks because that's going to basically set that bird's gut health up to kind of maximize nutrient absorption through the remaining production period? Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Couple things on that front. So you are correct. Typically, the biggest key to to maximize production is getting those birds off to a good start. That first 1 to 3 to 5 weeks is incredibly essential in developing that gut, getting that bird growing the way it needs to. Because what we kind of find is if those birds don't get off to a good start immediately, they never catch up. It just gets worse and worse. Unfortunately, just kind of how it happens. That's true for broilers too. If you those first 2 weeks, if you don't get them off to a just blazing start, you'll never catch up. So that 2 weeks, so if you ever look at formulation software or formulation program and feeding, what you'll find is the starter feeds are going to be your most expensive feeds. Those are going to be the feeds that are going to be highest ingredient quality, highest nutrient availabilities. Most of them are pelleted / crumbled, so that adds extra expense, but all with the intent of these birds need every chance they can to get off to a really good start, because if we lose them in the first 2 weeks, we're done. So in theory, the performance we saw here would carry through based on multitudes of production data that you can kind of correlate 5-week production to an 18-week production. That's part of it. The other part of it is, so unfortunately, a full grow out turkey trial is roughly about $130,000. So versus a 5-week battery study is about 20. So being that we didn't really know what to expect, we certainly didn't want to put that sort of commitment financially into something that, for all again, you never know. You pay all this, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks in they quit eating the feed because they decide they don't like it, and you're like, uh-oh. So we were kind of dipping our toes in the water as opposed to jumping straight in the deep end. So that is something else, though, that we certainly, and it's something, frankly, the FDA will expect. It's not, you're never going to be able to go and be like, here's 5-week data showing it's safe. They're like, cool, aren't they raised to 18 weeks though? So that is something that eventually will have to come, but these are all, again, this is preliminary stuff, trying to figure out, will it work? And I think the overall question we answered was, it certainly is applicable. I think it certainly has a space in the turkey industry. The biggest question is going to be, honestly, is production from the hemp side. So how much hemp can be produced, how much hemp seed cake can be made from that, because side note, another reason why we targeted turkeys is A, it's a big industry here in North Carolina, but B, they're just not as big as the broiler industry. And so right now, hemp production isn't anywhere near something like a soybean meal production. So the idea of, even if it did amazing things for broilers, if we went to integrators in North Carolina and said, yeah, no, it's going to blow your feed conversion out of the water, they're like, great. So 20%, we make about 5 million tons a year, $20 operations. You can get that to us, right? No, not a chance. So trying to find a little bit smaller industry that kind of, makes a little bit more sense from a production standpoint right now. And obviously the hope is as hemp continues to grow, you essentially improve your production to a point where maybe you have that quantity on hand to kind of move into those other spaces. But that's kind of why we started with turkeys right now.
This is fascinating. I'm personally enjoying your presentation and conversation. I hope everyone else is as well. We had James who chimed in on the chat saying, so overall, do you feel that this feed is producing more protein and healthier flocks?
By more protein, I'm assuming he means like meat yield, or is he mean like protein?
I don't. Yeah, so James, if you want to chime in on the chat on a context, we could probably ensure we're answering your question appropriately. But Corey, if you want to take a stab at it, maybe you can address the healthier flocks.
Yeah, health is something that I wouldn't go as far as healthier flocks. It certainly could. My stance on hemp seed cake right now is, first things first, you got to get it approved for feeding. Which means you need data showing that they can eat it, they can grow on it, and it's safe for consumers. Once that happens, I think you certainly could get into the space of looking at things like the polyunsaturated fatty acid content of hemp seed cake, along with polyphenols and everything else that, oh, look, we have these natural antioxidants in here that it could help with, inflammatory response in turkeys. Maybe that'll help, help overall health, or the fiber in it potentially could improve, hind gut microbial populations. Maybe that is a improved immune, response there. A lot of that stuff, gets kind of abstract until you really dive into it. But you have components there that I think it could potentially. Right now, can I say yes? No, I don't have the data to kind of say, oh yeah, it makes the flock more healthy. I just have data saying essentially they eat it and they grow really well on it. So, but I'm going to assume he means more meat. They grow faster, they produce more meat within a period of time. I guess from that perspective, yes, if hemp seed cake in theory could help with that. A lot of it though is more just on the nutrient level. It's the more concentrated you add, you provide energy and amino acids, the more concentrated they are, the faster the birds grow, the heavier the birds grow, the more meat you produce. It's just finding that level of how much do we want to spend on feed to meet that return at the end of the product, to make sure we're kind of making that profitability margin, because they get really tight really fast, right? So it's I may have just gave you a big word salad there, but yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. He did clarify in another comment saying yes, quality of meat and yield compared to other feeds. I would assume standard commodities. Yeah.
So meat quality, I will say, again, we haven't looked into anything here, hemp seed cake. I know with like beef feed, the beef industry, there's a lot of hope that a hemp seed meal might be able to improve meat quality because of the polyunsaturated fatty acid content. Those improves the omega-3s in there, right? Turkey, you probably won't see that, and the reason why is because they're just so lean. You don't really have a whole lot of fat content in any of that in there anyway, so you don't really get that healthy fat. So as a result, you're not really going to see that what you see in the beef industry. That being said, you may be able to improve some myopathies in the actual breast. So woody breast is a good example of, we're trying to figure out what causes it, but it's essentially when a breast gets really, really hard and retains water, and we don't really know why. There's a possibility that certain aspects of hemp could help with that. But again, you just don't know until you really design experiments to really focus on answering those questions. So there's potential, but you just don't know until you know. Kind of is my answer to that, I guess.
I think that's a great answer, and a great way to kind of to wrap things up with you. We are coming to the end of the hour here. Dr. Wishon, I just want to say thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It sounds like we're likely going to have you on again, maybe later this year, early next year, to talk about some of the other stuff you're working through, because it sounds very interesting. So we'd love to get an update on that when you have that data. So thank you so much.
Do it. I enjoy it.
Absolutely. So for those of you, yeah. So for those of you still with us, I just went ahead and put a reminder in the chat, but I just wanted to also touch on the, please mark your calendars and prepare to join us the third Thursday of May 21st, for our next HFC webinar. And then for those of you that are interested in attending Cornell's webinar, it's next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where they'll be discussing weed management with Carla Gage from Southern Illinois University. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Corey, thank you so much for your time today. Again, really enjoyed your presentation, and excited to see what else comes out of North Carolina.
Anytime.
All right, y'all. You have a good rest of your afternoon.